Hello and welcome. Today it's my honor to introduce a very special individual from MIT to all of you. I have with me Bhaskar Pant, who is the MIT Professional Education Executive Director. He has been selected as the winner of the first ever UPCEA Leadership in Diversity and Inclusive Excellence Award from the University Professional and Continuing Education Association, a leading association for professional, continuing, and online education. Pant has conducted scores of cultural awareness sessions and intercultural communication workshops for staff, faculty, and student groups. In addition, Pant has been proactive in hiring a highly diverse staff, one that mirrors the US population. He has consistently worked with his staff to expand the reach of MIT's professional programs among underrepresented and underserved populations globally, including women and non-English speaking professionals. And in fact, now under his leadership, the program offers courses in many different languages on multiple continents. Welcome, Bhaskar. It's such a pleasure to have you on Lokvani. Hello.
No, and it's a pleasure for me to talk with you as a former MIT colleague, in addition to being the editor of Lok One.
Yes, it was really special to meet you while I was at MIT. And so I'm excited to hear about this award. And it's an inaugural award. So could you tell us, what it means to you to get this very, very, very special award?
Well, yeah, obviously, I feel very honored and, quite frankly, very humbled, because it was not something I consciously set out to do to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. As I've said to my colleagues, it's part of me automatically. I was born in Southern Africa of Indian heritage. And so I grew up in a racially segregated society, which was legally segregated. It's quite a different experience for most South Asians, quite frankly,
Yeah.
in the sense that I went through the British colonial days and into independence. Can you believe it? At my age, I've experienced both sides of the fence, if you will.
Exactly.
So in that sense, in the British days, we were all sent to an Indian school. The Africans were at the African school. The Europeans, as we call them, were at the European school.
Mhm.
And so everybody had their own individual education. And it always had curiosity in me saying, well, why are we being kept separated? And what is it about the others that we don't know? Because we're not being allowed to be with them, then the curiosity rises even further. Oh, what is so special about them, or what is so different about them?
Right.
So I guess where I'm coming from is diversity and equity issues were part of me just growing up in Southern Africa in a British colony. And then the country became independent. Of course, indigenous people, the Black Africans took over,
Yeah.
and Indians were still a minority. So you have to function as a minority in white rule as well as black rule. So in a way, we get it from both sides. But the point is that you learn so much about differences. And then the idea is to bridge those gaps. So when I came to the United States and started studying here, of course, I was that much more sensitized to these differences to begin with. And then I saw all kinds of upheavals in the United States with the Vietnam War and war and then all kinds of racial unrest and riots and so on and so forth. So I was really put in the middle of another, if you like, a war between races in one sense, and getting sensitized to polarization as well. So all of that, when that's your backdrop, and you go to a university that, of course, has people from all over the world, then you start looking at the contrasting aspects, and you say to yourself, why are these people going at each other when in fact there is so much more in common that they can pursue together?
Sure.
So I think that's a good background for you to understand what has motivated me. That doesn't matter what I was doing at MIT or not doing, that was always going to be part of me because of the background I just described.
So it was not, as I understand, a special thing that seems to have happened more recently with all the different, the Black Lives Matters and, all the awareness that's happening, where all this has been more spotlighted. But it seems like it was just something that was so natural to you.
That's
And
correct.
is that what So when they recognized you for this, so this is probably they are acknowledging a lifetime of work. Is that
I would say so. I mean, initially they didn't know, but when
yeah,
they saw the nomination and they saw my background,
yeah.
it only further reinforced. They were, of course, looking at more recent history and my work with MIT and particularly with professionals and so on and so forth. And that's true. That's a more recent history.
Yeah.
They found out about me in terms of my roots and my journey to coming to America. And then, of course, it reinforced it further, I guess is really what it amounts to.
Fantastic. I mean, that is really interesting. And to your point, I mean, you came from a segregated South,
Yes.
Africa to
Yeah.
a country like America, which is quote unquote pretty equal. It was
Yes.
not legislated to be unequal. And, arguably, people would say definitely there's, like a lot of equality. And yet you were very sensitive to perceive all the differences that is coming to light now.
Yes.
So when you look at all the work that you have done at MIT, for example, what would you say was, and MIT itself, they used to pride themselves in being a very diverse, inclusive kind of place. So where did you see the biggest opportunities to make a difference when it came to diversity?
And I'm glad you asked that question because that's the very first thing that happened when I was given a chance to lead this particular very exciting activity. I said, well, we are catering to the world. Well, that's nothing terribly new for MIT. MIT has always had people come from different parts of the world.
Right.
I said, but do we go where the students are? Do we go where the needs are? And the answer was, no, we don't really go out there. They come here. And I said, I understand about them coming here. What I'm really sensitive to, because I come from an area where, in fact, education is a high priority, particularly in its independent days when the African people were not really well developed by the British colonial masters. And so they had to just basically fend for themselves. A lot of them, by the way, got their degrees in India, as it turns out in those days. And there were only about 20 graduates at the time of independence. They all became government ministers, you can understand.
Wow.
So when you grow up in an environment like that, you say, there is such a need here for education and professional development. So when I took over, I said, you've got to do something. And it wasn't just only about Africa, but that gives you a context.
Yeah.
What I was saying is, how often have we gone to where the people are? And the answer was, well, we've gone once to Japan. There was a corporation that invited us. I said, no. This is proactively, what are we doing? And the answer was very little. And I said, well, that's going to change under me. So we're going to reach out. And to make a long story short, now we're in all continents except for Antarctica, everywhere we've been, in terms of reach. And of course, this had to be sold to the faculty as well. Not everybody was willing to say, well, let's go to Nigeria. It wasn't going to happen. They would say, well, I'm so busy with my research and going there and coming back and then teaching there for 3 days. I mean, my whole week or 10 days are shot. And the answer is yes, that's very true. So obviously there has to be something that is advantageous to the faculty member as well. I know that it would be advantageous for the people we were going to address. And then they discovered that they are really finding out about ground realities of certain things that are happening, including implementation of technology. How is technology helping people? Unless you really go there and look at them, you're going to be in your research lab here with your world that is around you. And that's not necessarily the world that is the one we impact as MIT.
Sure.
So you have to go there, is the bottom line. And when some faculty tasted it, they said, look, these are things we didn't know about. All these professionals are now bringing up issues that we didn't know about. Now we're learning about it. So what happened as a result? They brought in those experiences, in fact, back to their education for undergraduates and graduate students, degree students. So we brought in reality via our gateway, if you will. But then I also look at the impact side of things, which is what does it do to the people who themselves? And the answer is they didn't have the wherewithal to really and means to come to MIT. And then to have all kinds of accommodation expenses and everything else. I mean, put together, it's a massive expense to come to MIT. Whereas if we go there, we're in their country and we are offering them something that they just say, my God, MIT has come to us. And so as it is with our prestige and our name brand, it's easy to penetrate markets. But the fact is, then you have to implement it. You have to actually do it.
Right.
So we have done it, and now we are doing it through partnerships, because those people who know best their own localities are the
Yeah.
best way to really partner with them, because we sitting here at MIT may not know all the ground realities.
Sure.
So,
And I
so
think to that point, I think like, I always think about the fact that if you are aware of more ground realities and
yes,
problems, the opportunities for technological innovation also probably expands, right? And I know that MIT, that's what
exactly.
they do. So I assume that they are coming up with new problems and new solutions, and that can only be good for everybody, right?
You're absolutely right. I mean, if you look at the MIT mission, it says work with others, first of all, work with others
Yeah.
for the betterment of humankind.
Yeah.
Well, just if you just concentrate on those words, work with others. Well, that's what I'm saying. Work with others.
Yeah.
Then for the betterment of humankind, that is not American kind. Humankind is all the world over.
Exactly.
So, and to your point, you are impacting the world. Well, then you have to know the world to impact the world.
Yeah, yeah. And I would think also the innovations that come out of new, realities will impact us back, right? It's just like sending something to on a mission to Mars, right? It
Yeah.
becomes valuable to improve the technologies for our own life, doing it maybe at a low cost, maybe off-grid solutions. I think all of that could be very valuable to what we want to do.
No,
And
no,
I,
no, that's absolutely right. In fact, the fact is that when you discover low-cost solutions for a particular market, or with lack of resources, etc., all those inventions actually affect the whole world,
yeah,
because they have ramifications even in the developed world. It's just that we don't realize it until we actually experience it. Because we have to, as you say, we have to be that much more innovative, that much more inventive when we have challenges that we don't have here, but the other people have that there. And if you can solve that problem, then this is easy to do things here.
right.
So,
That's
so that's exactly the point.
Yeah, I'm so glad. I mean, I see the point now of expanding the reach and going out, all over the world and, getting to know ground realities. That is really phenomenal. And now within the United States too, I mean, I think there is a lot of opportunity for diversity and inclusion. And, often I hear about the fact that, if we go to certain communities and technology can probably bring about a change in their lives as well. Have you had such experiences, and anything that you could mention within the United States that you might have done to bring about more diversity and inclusion opportunities?
Well, I mean, in a way, we're doing it even now abroad, but we have a mission to bring in many more women students, for instance, into our fold.
Yeah.
And the women in STEM courses on an average is about 25 to 28%. So I put it on my staff to say that is not good enough. I mean, if we reach 50%, I'll feel good, but 25 to 28%, I don't feel good. So let's do something about it. And so we've really reached out in many, many ways of attracting more and more women to our courses, and we seek them out, etc. And then we have improved the diversity, at least on that front, to over 30% easily, but we've reached even 40% in some areas. And that itself is but with also looking at the global aspects of things. I just want to add that while we have that campaign of bringing in more women, I also said, well, what are the impediments? As it turns out, particularly outside the United States, that English language was in fact an obstacle, in the sense that for whatever reason that are more cultural than anything else, in different parts of the world, women are educated less in terms of languages, particularly the English language. They're educated more in their native tongues. That doesn't mean that they're not familiar with science, math, etc. They are. But to express themselves in English is a handicap. Well, then what are we going to do about it? So I again put myself a challenge and said, so why don't we translate these courses into their languages? And so when we, just to give you an example, when we translated to Spanish and Portuguese, which we have done now, lots of courses that are being offered online, automatically, would you believe, I didn't know if this was a guarantee, but I had a hunch, and then it became reality. More and more women started enrolling into our courses. And today we have reached 30-40% as a result of that. And in fact, we have more women and men also, but more women from Peru, just as an example. Now, could we have predicted that? No, we couldn't have predicted that. But the fact that we facilitated it allowed these women to say, now you're talking, I can actually get in and understand what you're talking about. and
Sure.
I'll become part of the solution. That's
Absolutely.
exactly what we wanted.
Fantastic.
So, yeah.
And are you doing a lot in India and I know that, by the way, to get a little context, your programs are professional development programs. So these are actually technology courses offered by MIT faculty. Is that right? Could you
That's
give us
right. So
an overview?
primarily, as you can imagine from MIT, mostly these are technology courses that are being offered by MIT. You are absolutely, by MIT faculty, that you are absolutely right about that. We do offer them in different parts of the world, and I haven't talked about India, but in fact, in India, we have offered these courses as well, not just by the virtue of the fact that when we offer something online, it goes through the world and to all parts of the world, including India, but we've actually gone into India to offer our courses in person as well, through our partners. So that progress is going on. But I should mention one other thing, because what I teach is intercultural effectiveness and cultural awareness.
Yeah.
And it has become part of our portfolio, because one of the things that we're also missing out at MIT, and we're now becoming more and more conscious, is that you can't just keep teaching people technical skills. You're good at that. But what about human skills? Things like team building, things like cultural awareness, things like leadership, negotiation skills across cultures, all those kinds of things are such a big part of teamwork across the world. When you form a team to invent something or to pursue a project, inevitably you're going to have people from different parts of the world, even in the United States. But I'm saying if you do it across borders, more the reason why, do you understand each other? Because maybe you understand coding and maybe you understand the challenge of artificial intelligence, but you're not communicating with each other. You know why? Because you have some communication gaps.
Beautiful. And I think this is the new reality of the world where everything is global. And I know that there are many, many companies, especially within India and US. I mean, there's a lot of technical collaboration that goes on. People are outsourcing a lot of work. And I have heard that cultural differences are always some things that the engineers always come across and are challenged by that. So that's really fantastic. And I know that you've been working a lot with undergraduate education as well. So are you already building these kind of ideas or any influence in bringing cultural awareness, diversity, inclusion? Because MIT kids, I know, are the ones who are going and building those companies. So how are you training them for the world of the future?
So, because of my reputation, mainly I've been doing cultural awareness workshops for staff. Because if you think about it, staff are between international and domestic students,
Sure.
and then you've got international and domestic faculty.
Right.
So staff are interfacing with a lot of international people, is the point I'm making. And so I took it upon myself to say, I'll do workshops for staff groups. Then it extended into, and the question you asked me about undergraduates. So now my cultural awareness workshop is a requirement for all incoming international undergraduate students. It's a requirement, and it's part of orientation. Now, one of the things I'm fighting against, and hopefully I'll win, is that why are we restricting cultural awareness to international students? Yes, they need it because they have to connect with American students and students from other parts of the world. True, fair enough. How about Americans who have, in fact, generally less knowledge about the world?
Yeah.
They're the ones who need it more. So I have been championing that among staff, which is mainly American, that I train.
Yeah.
In fact, I should tell you that yesterday I trained people at MIT Medical. These are medical practitioners who have to talk to students who are international, but also their family members, wives, spouses, etc. And there are all kinds of communication gaps. And this is very serious, because this can be up to life and death situation because of a misdiagnosis or miscommunication or whatever. So the stakes are very high, and you have to really be able to communicate. So it's not only undergraduates, it's the community at large, but undergraduates are being patients at MIT Medical. Undergraduates have to deal with staff. Undergraduates have to deal with faculty. Undergraduates have to deal with graduate students, who, by the way, at MIT, 40% of the graduate students are international. 40%, over 40% of the faculty is non-US born. So with that, those kinds of ratios, inevitably you're going to run into some cultural issues and obstacles.
Sure.
And so where I'm coming from is, yes, it has become part of undergraduate orientation for international students, but I've also been invited by various professors to say, how about people in our labs. They have to, in fact, execute projects, but as a team. And they're running into some issues because they're talking to students from different parts of the world. So I have been now doing workshops for undergraduate students who are in projects and team kind of formations. So that little by little, it's going into mainstream education, which is what I'm trying to tell you. And it's fine. It's a step-by-step process, but there was nothing there before.
Yeah, no, I think this is great. And your point about emphasizing that, cultural education needs to happen for undergraduates from
Yeah,
America coming in. I think that's just
yeah,
fantastic. And having diversity and inclusion kind of ideas from the get-go.
yeah.
I think I hope you succeed in your endeavors to bring that.
Yeah,
And
well,
it's
I think there's growing realization, but as you know, there's been it's an issue that's in people's heads that other people need more education when they come to America, and not that that's a wrongful statement by any means, but the fact is you're ignoring one huge part of it,
Yeah.
which is that it's the Americans who need it much, much more. And I think we're finally getting there. So we'll hopefully, with also a full-time diversity and equity officer at MIT, which is a very recent development. I hope that we're on that road already. But I'm certainly doing my part at MIT in that sense.
Thank you, Bhaskar. That is really fantastic. And looking towards the future, it appears with all the initiatives, all the awareness that has built, that we are going towards a more diverse, more inclusive, more aware future. What does your crystal ball tell you?
Well, I think that, and you were bringing up a little earlier on about Black Lives Matter, and so on and so forth, that we have movements, Me Too movement, so on and so forth. So clearly these issues have come to the surface in a more massive kind of a way. And really people are, and then of course with video footage of things of bias and prejudice and things like that are now much more real. It also says that people are that much more sensitive to saying, we have to do something about it. So, well, if you have to do something about it, the first and foremost thing is, do you understand each other? And that's where my whole workshops are all about gaps that are there because of preconceived notions about different cultures. And then you have to say stereotypes have to be beaten down. And you have to look at realities. And indeed, there are differences, but no, nothing can be not overcome. I mean, you just have to understand it and then you will get there. Which by the way, so I should also tell you that I started with Indians first. And this is the background that may be missing, is that I was the first head of Turner Broadcasting in South Asia. I don't know if you know that.
Oh my God, no, I didn't know that.
I was appointed to head of CNN, Turner, all the networks, CNN, Cartoon Network, and Turner Classic Movies. I was the first South Asia head, and based in New Delhi. And why am I telling you this is because, one, we learned about cultural effectiveness in that we were bombarding children with Cartoon Network, which is fine. I mean, some mothers just loved it, saying now they finally can send people to see something entertaining, but at least it was hopefully wholesome. But it wasn't Sesame Street by any means. But the fact is, one of the things that, for instance, I'll just give you an example. There was a series called Cow and Chicken. Well, it was being fed from London, but it was an Asia feed. And I said to them, you have to be culturally sensitive. Cow is a revered animal in India. And this was a smart alecky cow and belligerent, etc. It wasn't in keeping with what people would want to see. But when you bombard something through a satellite feed, which covers so many countries, then you are not being sensitive to individual sensitivities in different countries. So I got a lesson even in that said, well, you have to be careful about what you aim where, because it could be and you can say, well, it's entertainment, it's only for kids. Well, no, you never know. It could be interpreted very differently by different parents and cultures. So that's just one example. But the second thing is, after I left Turner Broadcasting, and why did I leave it? Is because I saw a golden opportunity. This is at the time of the year 2000, and we had Y2K issues going on, if you remember. Indian software engineers were being exported by the droves.
Right.
And where were they coming? Mostly to America. Right. And I saw that they were not prepared to really, they didn't know anything about Americans except for stereotypes through Hollywood movies. And I said, these people need to know how to really deal with their clients. They're going to have new clients there. They're going to work with them, and yet they know very little about them. So I formed my own professional development company in India.
Wow.
And I started training software engineers about what it means to go to America and what are some of the things. And it became hugely popular. I mean, multinationals were asking me to come and give workshops to all their new employees and old employees and everybody who's going to have to do with America, and then later on with Europe as well. So that is where it took birth. I started getting into from the media world into the education world, because I really was pretty much on the media world side, even before Turner Broadcasting. And so then to turn into a trainer and somebody who cares about education started there. And that's what led me to MIT. But where I'm coming from is in India, my significant, first of all, it took birth there. The professional development aspect of it took birth in India with software engineers. And since then, we've revisited India, even on behalf of MIT, because the needs are much larger now. And we are fulfilling them, I think, with both technical and human skills. I keep saying that it's the combination that is needed all over the world, but including India.
Perfect. Thank you for saying that. I think the human skills and I think especially during the last year, that has come out really up to the front that we need to do this. Now I have just a few words of wisdom maybe from you. One of the things that I think when you are, of an Indian origin, or, you're an immigrant, when you see issues, I mean, everybody has gone through places where we didn't feel included, or, we have faced, kind of things. But what suggestions you might have if people are experiencing discrimination or any other kind of issues? Most of us are trained to just shut up and be quiet about it. And I know that people are being more aware, but do you have any thoughts and suggestions, especially for women, that if they experience something, what would you suggest how do they handle it?
Well, if you experience something, to keep quiet is not going to solve it. It merely says that you want to keep out of trouble. I mean, that's really the inclination. Yeah. What it really amounts to, and it depends on the circumstance, so I don't want to generalize, but the fact is you need to understand where they're coming from. In other words, it's called empathy. Empathy is putting yourself in the other person's shoes, no matter how egregious the behavior of the other person.
Yeah.
You have to say, why is this person thinking this way? Remember now, this is how I started in Zambia, which is where I grew up. I was saying, why are Europeans looking upon Asians this way? Why are they looking upon Africans this way? What preconceived notions do they have in their heads? And then when you establish some kind of a dialogue, and the opportunity has to occur where you say, look, I'm not questioning your motives, but I do want to understand more about why you're feeling the way you are feeling. And I'll tell you what I feel, whether that may be erroneous or something that can correct your impression, but you hear me out. But if you show the willingness to hear them out, then that really starts disarming them, because you're saying, I'm interested in what you have to say, as opposed to, this is wrong. You're just a prejudiced guy. And let's not talk about it, because we'll only get into trouble. Well, how are you going to solve anything by doing that?
Interesting. Thank you. That was very, very insightful. Thank you so much for that. I wish I had heard that a long time ago. I think that would have been a very useful comment to have with me. So really very exciting to see that there is not only, as you said, not just professional programs that talk about technology, which of course MIT has arguably some of the best that is out there, but now for people, and I think the online medium is allowing people to access things easier. And I've heard that even for women, that they feel more comfortable in an online environment, and probably that's also increasing your view. So how would you suggest people make use of the wonderful services that your department is offering? Because I think that's available to the world at large, right? So any suggestions?
No, it is. So obviously I could say, go to our website. I mean, that's the best way of doing it. And you will discover that you can take courses that are of multiple kinds. And we've now started offering certificate portfolios. What does that mean? So if we say digital transformation, digital transformation is such a big term in terms of inclusiveness, in terms of technology. Many areas, it could be cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, machine learning, so on and so forth. But then we also include in there the things that we've just been talking about, the human skills aspect of leadership elements, elements of leading project teams, so on and so forth. And including cultural awareness and communication in general. Those are being embedded so that we then have certificate programs. So you get something in digital transformation that is not strictly digital technologies, but in fact, it prepares you for a career in that area with human skills included. This is a novel area, and we're packaging it in such a way that if you take that certificate portfolio, then you have that much more expansive skills that you can gather. And you can do it from your home, as you were just saying, that you can do it online. So these portfolios are now available online. Admittedly, some of it we were pushed into because of the pandemic, but that's what I call silver linings. We have discovered that this is in fact a better way to reach the world. Well, the world was actually available also. This was another thing. The global pandemic said to us, the guy in Peru is available, so is the guy in India, and so is the guy in America, because they do have that time while they're at home. As long as they have an environment where they can spend a few hours to learn, which is obviously not always the case, but mostly it's the case because they have normalized to that way of working now, then we should take advantage of that. So in a way, I will tell you that we broke a record in 2020 for the number of online learners that we got. Wow. In a pandemic year, when people were experiencing reduction in all kinds of enrollments and revenues and everything else, we actually shot up. So there you are. But in the online area, not in the in-person area, obviously that have changed. But my point is, people said, oh, I have the time and I can take courses taught by MIT faculty. Why would I not do that?
So, I mean, I think this is great. I mean, you expanded your offerings, but more importantly, you were allowing others to upskill themselves from the best of the best. And it sounds like a certification from MIT can only be helpful in your career wherever you go. So I think that is really, really wonderful that you are able to offer this. And I look forward to seeing, how everything is going to move forward in the next year. And hopefully you are really skilling a lot of people who may not have had that opportunity otherwise.
Yeah, you're right. And you had asked me earlier about people getting together and forming companies. And, entrepreneurship is a big part of what MIT produces. And innovation. And innovation and entrepreneurship are almost two words that are endemic to MIT. But the fact is, through this education, we have found that people who have started taking our online courses have started communicating with each other and started forming companies.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So in that online environment, that MIT culture is being able to be
right, because you're putting them together in project teams to execute, even though on a virtual basis, they get to know each other. Yeah. And one thing we did, this is pre-pandemic, just before the pandemic, we had online courses even before then. But we said, now, how can we bring these people together? So, and I was telling you that it gave us a surprise that there were more students from Peru in Latin America than anywhere else. We actually held a summit in Lima, Peru, on the ground.
Wow.
And those people who didn't know each other in person, only by Zoom, if you will, they actually came there and met with each other. And we found that through that collaboration of meeting each other, networking that happened in person, 4 companies were formed. There you are.
Fantastic. That's really fantastic. So now MIT certification doesn't have to be a dream that only the very few can get.
Exactly.
But it's become accessible to others.
And I think you hit on the nail on the head. No longer is it something that only the elites can access.
Yeah.
I say you can be an elite university, but you don't have to be elitist.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And therefore, reaching out to many, many more people is really the service to mankind that we talk about. Can only happen if you really expand your horizons and your reach. It would seem common sense, but the fact is it's not that easy to achieve unless you keep pushing it. And that has certainly been my singular mission.
Well, I see that it's just exciting to see that you have been able to push through on your passion and accomplish so much. To see things coming to fruition must give you great joy. And I think what you have done has made a big difference for the world at large. So thank you, Bhaskar, for your time. Thank you for taking the time to do good for the world and also to talking to us at Lokvani. Thank you very much. And I look forward to checking out your courses online as well.
Well, thank you, Ranjini. And we want to wish you the very best in the coming year post-pandemic, and every one of your readers and listeners. So I wish them all well and look forward to interacting with you again. Thank you.
Thank you so much.